Hi, I'm Mary Reilly, the chef and owner of the Savory Kitchen, and today we're going to make salted honey caramels. The first step in the process is to line the pan. This recipe uses an 8x8 baking dish. I have this nice one with straight sides, but you could feel free to use whatever you've got on hand. We're going to use parchment paper. You can get this in rolls or in sheets. And what I do is just fold the parchment so that it's 8 inches wide. And I use 2 sheets. And then lay them into the baking dish. In a crisscross shape so that when they're done I can pull the finished caramels out. So what I'm going to do now is just spray the pan lightly with a nonstick cooking spray, and then just sprinkle the nuts on the bottom of the pan. Next we're going to add the 2 basic ingredients for this recipe, honey and sugar. I'm using 6 ounces of honey. That's a half a cup of honey if you're measuring by volume, 6 ounces if you're measuring by weight. Use a good flavored honey for this. This is a wildflower honey, but it's a local honey, so it's got a really nice flavor. But you might have the opportunity to use another honey, like a buckwheat honey, or another local honey that has great flavor. And this is a 1.5 cups of sugar. And we're just going to stir those together. And then we're going to go to the stove. Okay, so now we've got our sugar and honey combined in a saucepan, and I'm going to put it over medium-high heat and let the sugar start to melt into the honey. And what we're going to do is let this melt until it's as dark as you want. I like a very rich, dark flavor in my caramel, so I'm going to take this to a fairly dark brown, almost a chestnut brown. If you want a milder flavored caramel, you can stop this just when you get to a nice light colored caramel. This process will take about 3 to 4 minutes, and you do want to stay by the stove because your caramel can go from beautiful golden lusciousness to completely bitter, smoky mess in about 30 seconds. And now I think that's probably about dark enough. You can see the rich color when you swirl it. And so what I'm going to do now, and this is where you really have to be careful, I'm going to add cream and butter to this, and they're going to sputter. So do be careful. Any small children, keep them away. Just watch out. You don't want to hurt yourself. This caramel is very hot, and you could get a pretty bad burn. So I'm adding 4 ounces of unsalted butter. It's at room temperature, cut into cubes. And I'm also adding a cup of cream. Things start to sound a lot more exciting. It's bubbling up. Take your spatula and you just want to stir carefully. You see there's bits of butter flying around in there. You want to stir until that's smooth. Now at this point you want to put your candy thermometer in. This is a standard candy frying thermometer, and it's got a little stand on it that keeps the bulb from sitting on the base of your saucepan. If yours doesn't have that kind of base, just make sure when you put your thermometer in that the bulb isn't sitting on the floor of the pan, or else you'll get an inaccurate reading. And we want to take this to 250 degrees, which is a stage called firm ball. And that's going to give us a caramel that's soft and chewy, but that's not going to stick to your teeth quite so hard. It's also not going to be so soft that it's going to be really hard to work with. This process can take anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the temperature of your room, how high your stove is. I find that between 240 and 250, that temperature can shoot up really, really fast. Okay, so I can see we're at about 248, so we're almost to 250 degrees. So there'll always be a little caramel left in the bottom of the pan, but it's better not to scrape it out. Sometimes if you scrape out the pan, you can actually start crystallization happening. That can happen when a grain or two of unmelted sugar gets into the melted sugar, and it can actually cause this to turn from a nice soft caramel into something that's a little more fudgy, but not in a good way. So just leave that be. And now here's your pan of caramel, and it's very hot. So what I'm going to do now is just let this sit at least 3 to 4 hours. Best is overnight. Do be careful when you pick up the pan. It's going to be really hot, so use pot holders. So now we're ready to cut and wrap our caramels. Here's a pan of caramels that I made before. These don't have nuts in them, but they were made exactly the same way as the others. And I've taken them out of the pan and peeled off the parchment paper. Now, before you start cutting them into pieces, it's really important to have something to wrap your caramels in. Because they're so soft, they really can get very sticky if they aren't wrapped when left at room temperature. I've found that the best thing to use is just basic parchment paper, and I cut it into 4x4 squares. So if you do get, I just want to show you a quick way to do it. If you can get the sheets of parchment, they're very convenient and very easy to use. You can buy them online and at a number of baking supply stores. So you're just going to fold the parchment in half the long way, and then in half again, and then in thirds. That makes a 4x4 square. And then it's just a matter of cutting along the fold lines, and you've got your parchment ready to go. This is an 8x8 square of caramels, so I'm going to cut 1-inch squares. A nice way to make sure that you're getting it even is just take your knife and just sort of rock it to give yourself some cutting lines. So what I've done there is given myself 4 lines each 1 inch apart, just eyeballing it. You can use a ruler if you prefer. And then what I'm going to do is just cut that first strip. Just use a sharp knife and an even stroke, and it'll come off. It'll usually attach itself to the knife, and then you can just peel it off. And then I cut in half, line them up, cut in half again, and half again, and then half again. Eight pieces. I just use a basic candy store kind of wrap. So I wrap the parchment up and over, and then pinch and twist and pinch and twist. And that is how you make salted honey caramels.